Welcome. Welcome to the Singapore Roundtable presented by AI Safety Asia and supported by IMDA. Today, we'll talk about Asia's perspective on AI safety, its risk, or spectrum of risks. So we're very happy today to have a series of very distinguished panel speakers with us today. And in terms of the flow of the event, we'll start with a opener by Philip, AI safety researcher, followed by a series of panel speakers. So before we dive into the agenda, just a quick introduction about AI Safety Asia and our Roundtable series. So AI Safety Asia is a nonprofit organization dedicated to reducing catastrophic risk by enhancing AI safety and governance in Asia. And we aim to bridge the gap between the global north and south by fostering local talent, conducting policy, research, and promoting intergeneration dialogue on AI safety. So we bring together experts, policymakers, stakeholders in the field of AI safety to discuss the unique challenges and opportunities of AI safety in Singapore and in the Asian context. So just a shout out, our next roundtable would be focused on Kuala Lumpur and also on Bangkok in January. So we'll start off first by a situation briefer on the AI safety situation in Singapore by our researcher, Philip. And then we'll be followed by our panel discussion moderated by Rina Chandran, Southeast Asia editor of Rest of World, and our series of panel speakers, including Professor Mohan, director of NUS AI Institute, Ms. Lee Wan Si, director of the Development of Data-Driven Tech of IMDA, and Michael Nelson, who's a senior fellow of Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and Asia Program. So without further ado, I'll pass the time now to Philip, who will take us through our situation briefer.
Thanks for that. So good afternoon, everyone. I will be giving a curtain raiser overview of AI safety in Singapore, and I'll be covering two main items today. First, I'll start with some recent developments on international AI safety governance that Singapore is involved in. And second, I'll give a general lay of the land of AI safety initiatives and regulation. 2023 and 2024 have been very productive years for international collaboration on AI governance. And within these two very short years, Singapore has already acted very quickly to contribute to this new activity. On the multilateral front, Singapore has been one of the few Southeast Asian countries who has been contributing to the international AI safety discourse. In November 2023, Singapore, along with 28 other countries, signed the Bletchley Declaration, which affirmed the importance of safety in AI innovation, and also committed to an internationally inclusive network of scientific research on AI safety. In May 2024, Singapore also signed the Seoul Declaration, which takes further steps towards building up the international scientific network on AI safety. In November 2024, the International Network of AI Safety Institutes was also officially launched in San Francisco. And to date, Singapore is the only Southeast Asian country with an AI Safety Institute that is part of this international network. On the multilateral front, Singapore has also been very active in rallying regional groupings to focus more on AI governance. It hosted the 2024 ASEAN Digital Ministers meeting, where the Guide on AI Governance and Ethics was adopted. Singapore has also been a very key proponent for the Digital Forum of Small States initiative, and in 2024, it released the world's first AI playbook for small states to shape discourse on harnessing the potential of AI in the context of small states. So the landscape of AI safety governance in Singapore is also very complex and nuanced, and I definitely will not be able to cover everything in exhaustive detail today, but I hope to be able to provide somewhat of a useful heuristic framework for how to view AI safety governance. Singapore's overall AI policy is articulated in the National AI Strategy 2.0 Blueprint, which was first launched in 2019 and then subsequently updated in 2023 in response to the proliferation of generative AI. This policy was developed by Smart Nation Singapore, an initiative led by the Ministry of Digital Development and Information. And the key idea behind this strategy is really to leverage AI for the public good. And it's very clear-eyed that this requires creating a trusted environment to deploy AI systems. and creating such a trusted environment by extension requires fit-for-work AI safety governance. AI safety governance in Singapore can roughly be split into two pillars. Firstly, initiatives that seek to promote AI safety on the one hand, and secondly, regulations meant to more minutely govern the development and deployment of AI on the other. I just want to caveat over here that this distinction is by no means mutually exclusive, and it's just handy to better understand the AI landscape in Singapore. On the first pillar of AI safety initiatives, we can see that Singapore, under IMDA's leadership, has set up several institutions to spur on research and development and collaboration on AI safety issues. First, there's the Digital Trust Center in NTU established in 2022 and designated as Singapore's AI Safety Institute in May 2024. And this basically operates as a research hotbed and accelerator, which aims to address gaps in global AI safety science. As of late, the DTC has already in place collaborative agreements with AI safety institutes in the US and the UK to focus on generative AI evaluations. An interesting point to note is that the DTC is housed in a university as opposed to other AI safety institutes like the ones in the US and the UK, which are tied to government agencies. There's also the AI Verify Foundation, which is a subsidiary of IMDA that acts as a platform for open collaboration. It launched the AI Verify Governance Testing Framework in 2022 that allows industry to validate the performance of AI systems against internationally recognized principles. It also extended these principles to the realm of generative AI, launching Project Moonshot in 2024, which is one of the world's first LLM evaluation toolkits. With that being said, onto the second pillar of AI regulation, which can be split into regulation that targets AI specifically and regulation that is not directly targeted at AI, but has impacts on it nonetheless. I won't be going into too much details on this and will only briefly touch on some examples from these two buckets. On the vertical axis, we can differentiate AI-specific regulations between those that are multi or cross-sectoral and those that are sector-specific. Cross-sectoral regulations are those such as the Model AI Governance Framework and the CSA's recent Guidelines and Companion Guide on Securing AI Systems. On the other hand, each sector also has its own tailor-made regulations issued by their respective government agencies. Of note, there are no hard laws specific to AI yet, and most of the regulatory framework pertaining specifically to AI falls under the corpus of soft law. On the other hand, there's also non-AI specific regulation that doesn't target AI directly, but has very strong implications for their use. Perhaps the most prominent example of this is the Elections Amendment Bill that was passed on October 15, 2024. This prohibited the publication of online election advertising containing digitally generated or manipulated content. Several patterns can be identified from how AI regulations are actually implemented in Singapore. At the moment, there seems to be a vertically hierarchical structure to AI regulations. So cross-sectoral regulations operate on a more general plane, while sector-specific agencies are given leeway to adopt more specific regulation. Secondly, there seems to also be a preference for incrementally layering AI regulation over existing laws instead of creating a single new omnibus law. Third, there's also a preference for soft over hard law to regulate AI at this stage of nascent AI safety science and standards making, which seems to be divergent from that of the EU, which adopted its EU AI Act in 2024 as a piece of hard legislation. Overall, Singapore is focused on capacity building for safety engineering and technical governance, following a very pragmatic approach, while its regulation landscape aims the eyes the low-hanging fruits in its domestic context. And with that, I've basically come to the conclusion of my overview, and I'll hand my time back to Melissa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip. So thank you for that. So right now, let me pass the time to Rina to kickstart our panel discussion.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm going to address my first question to 1C. We've just heard, Philip talk about the fact that Singapore has taken this soft approach to AI regulation. Why is this the preferred approach for Singapore? Why not a hard law like the EU? Why does Singapore prefer the soft approach?
Thanks, Rina, for the question. And first of all, also thank the organizers for inviting me to this event to share about what Singapore is doing. Before I answer your question, Rina, maybe I thought I'd just add on to some of the very interesting, pretty good presentation that Philip did just now. I think in terms of the work that we do, it's in the research space. It's not just DTC, which is the Digital Trust Center that Philip mentioned, but also I think we work very, very closely with different parties across the research ecosystem. That includes, since Prof. Mohan is online, the work by AI Singapore, especially around the AI governance. So I work very closely with the AI governance pillar in AI Singapore to look at the multidisciplinary impact of AI, right? And building trust in AI. So just something that I thought I'll just add on to Philip's presentation over there. To your question on why did we choose this approach, essentially, no hard law just yet that's horizontal with regards to AI, but looking at how we can augment different existing laws. It's because, one, we have existing laws in different areas. As Philip rightfully highlighted, we have sectoral legislation in healthcare, in financial services. We have Personal Data Protection Act, which deals with addressing data protection. We have also other types of laws in other sectors. And these are areas that we already care about, online safety, so on, and other areas. And because these are areas that we already care about, if we want to think about the impact of AI, then we should think about how we can augment these laws to clarify what we need to address in AI. So for example, in Personal Data Protection Act, what we did last year was we actually provided a lot more guidance about how you think about use of personal data for AI. That helps to clarify our expectations to the industry in terms of AI development using PD, right? So that's one. And I think we have a question on that later in the area of elections. We also try and figure out what we need to do to address some of the impact of AI. So it's really about how do we augment existing laws? Because I think it's much easier to do this quite quickly and practically. Two, the other reason why we haven't gone with a horizontal law is because the technology is moving very quickly. It's changing very quickly. Anything that's horizontal will need to adapt also to these changes in the technology. So again, Philip's point about our focus on building technical capacity and capability is where we want to get the ecosystem ready first to think about how they can implement in a responsible, trustworthy way before we then say we impose certain compliance or expectations on the ecosystem. So AI-specific interventions are very much soft law, guidelines, frameworks, tools, and where it's not AI-specific, then we see how we can clarify existing legislation. I hope that gives you some texture in terms of why we're doing it this way. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Mansi. Mohan, I wanted to ask you, it's quite curious, and Philip has mentioned this in his briefing, it's quite curious that Singapore has brought in academia. You know, the Digital Trust Center is housed within a university, and this is quite unusual. Why do you think academic input is so important in the way that Singapore approaches AI safety and the way that it thinks about AI? Why is the academic input and the sort of the research input so important?
Thanks, Rina, for this question. First of all, I think that is the right way to do. And even if you take the example of the AI Safety Institute in the United States, which is with NIST, but they have a huge number of partners, both from academia and industry. So I think what Singapore is doing is not substantially different, but in a way it sends a strong signal that the involvement of research is very critical. And I think there is a good reason for that. It is not that AI is a mature technology, which now, we have finished inventing everything that has to be invented, and this is the time for deployment. And basically then only the regulator or just the industry can come in. I think this is a very fast moving field, as Vansi just mentioned. In fact, if you see the aspects, tease out the aspects of AI safety, now this has been across many different facets. So first is the robustness of the systems. That are the systems robust? That means if you give a certain prompt or an input to an AI system, what you get as an output, and if you just change the input a little bit, hopefully the output also changes a little bit, but that's not necessarily so. So making systems robust is a very big research problem. The second thing, the standard things on bias, eliminating bias from AI systems, respecting privacy in AI systems, and most importantly is making AI systems not to be used for the wrong purposes. That means people should not, for example, the foundation models, one should not be able to ask questions for which these are not societally good questions. So I think there is this whole notion of value alignment, that our AI model should reflect the value of society. And it is not very clear that the current value alignment techniques are the best techniques. In fact, there are a lot of problems there. In fact, my own group does research in this area, and we have found that there are problems in the preference models, for example. There's a lot of instability in the preference models. So the whole point is, there is AI systems are being deployed, but AI systems are also being researched upon at the same time. And therefore, we see the models being announced practically every month, if not every week, new developments coming on. And therefore, if you are going to be worried about AI safety, and more importantly, you're going to regulate so the society is safe, then I think you need to be really in sync with the latest research which is going on. So I think absolutely, I think Singapore and IMDA has done the right thing by situating the AI Safety Institute within an academic institution. Also, I would like to say that there are two aspects of AI safety. One is the misuse of AI by human beings. So, AI can be misused. For example, we are hearing a lot of cases of, misinformation, disinformation, and also using deepfakes for, scams, or deepfakes, for, maligning people or harassment. So this is the misuse of AI by humans. But we should also remember that the AI system behavior itself has to be regulated. And this is going to be very critical. And this is why, and I'm tying it to the research point, is people are talking about agentic AI. And once you have AI agents which can do operations on behalf of the user, for example, physically move things or log into another computer or do something, or write code and execute that code, AI safety issues become even more critical. And in fact, we really don't know what are the implications of all this. And therefore, regulator has to work with researchers hand in hand so that we come up with the right regulation. And also, it is not that regulation is chasing technology, but it's keeping up with technology.
Okay, thank you for that. You mentioned that AI can be misused, and the whole sort of Singapore's national AI strategy has the aim of AI for the public good for Singapore and the world. But Singapore is also viewed as a tech-friendly nation, as a big tech-friendly nation. A lot of the big tech firms have their regional operations based in Singapore. Google Cloud has collaborated with the Singapore government on the AI Trailblazers project. So I wonder if there is some sort of can there be a dissonance between collaborating so closely with big tech firms while having this sort of public good motive, Vansi?
I think inherent in your question is the assumption that big tech is evil. I don't know. That seems to be.
Well, that is definitely the opinion of a lot of people. I'm just saying, in terms of, we just heard this view from Mohan on why academic input is so crucial. And, clearly tech tech input is very crucial as well. But with the motive of doing for AI for public good, I'm sure you can find a lot of people, even among our listeners today, that big tech is not particularly, looking out for public good. We've just seen Australia pass a law banning social media platforms for children under the age of 16. The Australian government clearly has a view that tech platforms are not keeping children safe. So I'm curious about, given that Singapore is a tech-friendly country, there's no disputing that. Do you think that big tech firms can work hand in hand with the government, with the Singapore government, in ensuring public good and AI safety?
I mean, big tech is operating here in Singapore. I think we are a tech-friendly nation to big and small tech users and tech deployers and so on. I think in general, I think technology is important for Singapore, for sure. We rely on it for, it's a small country, limited resources. We need to rely on technology quite a bit. So any company, big or small tech, when they're in Singapore, they have to comply with our laws. And I think this is expected of all tech companies. And I think your question is whether tech companies who are supposedly just looking out for themselves can still be a force for good, right? I think that's if I were to paraphrase that. They have resources. They have they are also big cloud players. For example, a lot of the AI is deployed. It requires the cloud resources to be able to be deployed. And even in participating in these programs with, let's say, with the government or with other organizations in trying to support SMEs, for example, in deploying AI, to support education of consumers in understanding how they could use AI more effectively. I think I don't think it necessarily needs to be a mutually exclusive outcome where big tech doesn't benefit and the public doesn't benefit, right? I think we can still find an outcome that's good for the public as well as companies. And it's not just limited to big tech. I think any enterprises, when they think about working in this space, in offering some kind of public good, they will want to see what's the benefit to them, whether it's good for reputation, whether it then translates to more users and so on. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that the public does not actually get to also benefit from access to these services or access to these programs. So in Trailblazer, I think it's an opportunity for small enterprises to think about how they could use AI effectively, accessing the kind of cloud resources that Google offers, and allowing them to, as well as engineering resources, not just cloud, and other kind of technical capacity and capabilities that allows them to bring up to speed their ideas very quickly. And that's not a bad thing. Of course, how Google benefit from it is getting more people to be able to use Google's resources, but I don't think it's necessarily a 1 or 0 outcome. Yeah.
Mohan, do you have anything to add in terms of how tech firms, and particularly big tech firms, can contribute to the dialogue on safety and regulation in Singapore?
Yeah, so I think I completely agree with the points which Vansi made, and I also question the assumption that big tech is always evil. I think that is it's too strong a position, I would say. And to be very honest, you cannot take big tech as a monolith with a certain objective. These tech companies constitute people, and I think engaging with people is very important. And I think among the big tech companies also, there are individuals working on AI safety research, and there are people who are concerned about many of the safety issues. To me, if the counterfactual is you shut out the tech from all these conversations and engagements, do you think we'll have a better outcome for the whole society and country? I doubt it. I would very much think that we have to engage with all the major players, especially some of the frontier models, the large models and all. This is where the tech companies are pioneering, because most of the universities and academic institutions don't have the large resources. So to me, it is even more critically important that we engage with the big tech companies.
Okay, that's fair. while Singapore has sort of chosen this sort of soft approach toward AI regulation, it's definitely taken the lead in helping other countries frame governance. For example, it's taken the lead in the ASEAN region. It's taken the lead with Rwanda on the regulations, guidelines, framework, for small states. So how does Singapore view itself in terms of, Singapore is one of the first countries to have a national AI strategy, much earlier on than other countries, as early as 2019. And they're at, National Strategy 2.0 right now. So how does Singapore view itself as a sort of how does Singapore view itself of helping other countries frame their thinking around their approach towards AI?
Maybe I can talk about this in two parts. I think the first is what Singapore wants to achieve when we participate globally. I think I'm not just talking about ASEAN or the small states, but in general, I think as a small state, we benefit from global norms and rules of the road, right? And rules that other countries have to follow, or other big enterprises have to follow. So we want to contribute to the development of these global norms. We want to offer our points of view on how these could be beneficial to Singapore and then to other countries that are of similar nature, whether it's about Southeast Asia or about small states, right? So that's one of the reasons why we participate actively in ASEAN. We participate actively in the UN, and and related to that, the small states, Forum of Small States. We can all benefit when it is when the rules are clearly laid out and everybody follows it. So that it's not just might does not translate into then just being able to change or do anything they like, right? So when we were working on the ASEAN guide, it's not something that's just about how Singapore's point of view, and hence we are pushing it through. We make sure that we have a process that is inclusive, that we hear from the other ASEAN member states, and what they need then can then be included as well. So it is a collaborative effort, it is a joint effort. We seed the effort because we have the capacity to do so. But at the same time, we make sure that it is relevant also to our neighbors in ASEAN, that it actually benefits them. So anything that comes out of ASEAN is something that we jointly do together, right? Then the second part that I want to highlight is it's also besides focusing on driving norms together, it is also about how we can build capacity. Singapore has taken this journey. We have started some of these work ahead of time. We are small. We have the resources to do so. We can move a little bit faster. And I think we're just trying to see then from that perspective, how then can our experience benefit other countries as well. So when we work in Rwanda on the small states playbook, it is really about how do we share experiences, right? And with a view towards capacity building. And if you read the playbook, it's not just about what Singapore has done, but it's also what Rwanda has done, what Switzerland has done, what other small states have done. So it is about sharing our own experiences. Small states have unique problems that we have to deal with. We have limited resources, limited data, for example. Although small states can span different types of capabilities, you have small states from different parts of the world with different ideologies and so on. But at the same time, I think we have some common problems. So the small states playbook allows us to share our stories, actually, and how we have dealt with certain issues. And hopefully other small states can benefit from it. And Singapore certainly can also learn from some of these experiences that our partners have gone through. Yeah, so it's in both, if I were to summarize, contribution to global norms, and we can come together to push or at least share our point of view, as well as then in capacity building.
Thanks, Vansi. Mohan, do you have something to add in terms of, yes, these are small states, but what can other countries learn from how small states approach AI safety and regulation? Like, what can be gained from that? And is there a case to be made? I mean, clearly we've made a case that one size doesn't fit all, and small states have unique problems, they have unique approaches. So what more can you tell us about how the experience of small states can benefit others as well?
Yeah. Okay. So I think, I mean, clearly, I think Vansi is in a much better position to have answered, and I think she's given a very comprehensive response. I would say, coming from a very academic and university perspective, to me, the small state may have a disadvantage of having less clout in the world, but small states also have the advantage of being nimble and looking, ahead much faster and doing things. So I think in many areas, I think Singapore has particularly shown that they can, you're not just looking at big states to follow. We can pioneer and do something innovative. And if it works well, other small states and bigger states can adopt that. And I think in many such legislation, often I think Singapore has moved ahead, and then it has become an exemplar for other countries. So I would say being a small state is not necessarily a disadvantage, especially if you are forward-looking, engaged on cutting edge in terms of both the regulatory advances as well as the technological advances, and also in a big way, engaging with all the other players, locally as well as globally, in a way to anticipate issues and try to proactively solve, because the larger systems have a lot more inertia, and therefore, legislating anything or regulating anything takes a lot more consensus building, where small states like Singapore have an advantage. So to me, we can be the policy lab of the world, why not? I don't know if Vansi agrees with me or not.
Yes, of course. I think that's something that we're always aspiring to do. Because we're small, we're more nimble, we can be more practical about things, we have less layers of government to work through. But at the same time, I think as you've rightly pointed out, Mohan, in the beginning, we are also have slightly less influence, I think, in certain areas globally because of our size. But we all bring different capabilities to the table. Yeah. Maybe I want to cite one example of how, and just to address Rina's earlier question about what can, maybe even states big and small learn from some of the things we've done. And I'm just pointing out to the work that AISA Singapore has done in Sea Lion. Actually, that's a very good example, not so much in the policy space, of how you could use very limited resources to be able to still do something that's very useful in AI for the country, right? And in this case, it's not just for Singapore, but for Southeast Asia. So we are continuously pre-training, building on Llama or Gemma models in order to address our local context and local cultural and linguistic context. So to build a model that actually is going to be useful to Southeast Asia, right? But that does not mean we have to, spend, millions and millions of dollars fine-tune building a model from scratch. I mean, one useful way to think about it is then how do we leverage on what's already out there, and then with the limited resources that we have, the limited access to data that we have, for example, then using this to try and then create something that's going to be beneficial for ourselves. Yeah. So that's one example of being nimble, practical, and doing something useful. And I don't know if Prof. Mohan, you have anything else you want to add to that?
So thank you for bringing up the AI Singapore Sea Lion example. I think that's a wonderful example. Thank you for doing that. But I just want to point out that there are certain unique challenges in this region, and which can be an example to the whole world. And one thing is that the Sea Lion is basically a foundation model, a large language model for ASEAN languages. So which is multilingual from day one. Okay. So one thing which was interestingly found out, about a year ago, when other countries were also trying to build models, and they did not very deeply think of some of the implications. And I'll just give you an example which was told to me by my friend in UAE. When Falcon, their model was released, apparently if you ask the same question in 2 different languages about a same country, it would give 2 different answers, because the answers in the two different languages were not aligned, because they were trained on separate data sets. So this is something which we are very conscious of, all these problems while building a multilingual model, which means that if I'm going to ask a question about some local regulation in Indonesia, and I ask in English in Sea Lion, whatever response I get, and if I asked in Bahasa, you would want the same response in Bahasa, which means semantically the same thing. And we actually try very hard to ensure that. And some of these multilingual models don't do that. And because now we are very conscious that a lot of these countries in the region are multilingual, people are bilingual, and they could ask the model in different questions. And if you are not careful, and if it is trained on compartmentalized data sets in different languages, you may get 2 different answers in 2 different languages, which actually can be unsafe. So these are some very unique problems, which we are trying to kind of grapple with. And this is not a thing which we have a good answer, and we are struggling with it. This requires research, because then ideally, no matter which language you ask a question and which language you get an answer, you have to get the same answer. This is not true of today's models. And that, to me, is a safety issue, which needs to be addressed. So I hope it tells you that some of the things which we experiment even at a small level in ASEAN region actually holds a big lesson for everywhere in the world.
Thank you. I did see a demonstration of the Sea Lion a few months ago. I'm sure it's advanced even more now. So I had a question regarding the deepfakes law. I mean, it's part of the whole election integrity, of course. But given that Singapore has sort of opted for this soft approach toward AI safety and regulation around AI, this seems to be a bit of an outlier to someone who's observing Singapore from afar. South Korea is the only other country that has adopted a deepfake ban, a political deepfake ban. So I wanted to get your thoughts, Vansi, on, was this necessary? Clearly, the country thought it was necessary, and therefore the law came into being. But were the existing laws that you talked about earlier, were they? I mean, how were they lacking in terms of preventing something like this? Sure, it's tied to election integrity, but there are also sort of larger concerns around freedom of speech. And given that also Singapore hasn't seen such an avalanche of political deepfakes like some other countries have experienced, right? And no one, there were very few Singaporeans, I'm sure, who were fooled by the deepfakes of Senior Minister Lee, for example. Because, in every instance, those deepfakes were removed, the officials spoke out against them. So the action was very quick, very decisive. So I wonder why, given that those actions were so quick and decisive, it was thought necessary to bring in a law. Perhaps you can talk us through that. And, I'm also wondering if this is a sign of things to come, or if this was just one of those one-off laws that was thought to be essential, and that's sort of an outlier from the way that Singapore approaches AI safety.
I first want to qualify that this is not my area of expertise. So, and I think that needs to be taken. So I won't be able to give a very detailed answer to your question. But maybe since you brought up freedom of speech, actually, we are not the only ones, not just Singapore and South Korea. I mean, California as well has passed a law, election law, banning deepfakes. And I think Brazil as well. And I think there are a few other jurisdictions thinking about it as well. So we're not that unique. to your point about our existing laws sufficient, I think for elections, it's core to our democracy, I suppose. And I think this is the same views that maybe other jurisdictions have thought about, right? If we do not be very clear about our expectations and requirements, and people are influenced for whatever reason, and this technology, as you know, as we have said a few times in this call, is moving so quickly. It's becoming a lot more sophisticated. It has become eventually, citizens might not be able to discern as well issues relating to deepfakes, or what's real and what's not. Then that's going to be a problem, right? And then their points of view are swayed, right? And then that impacts the elections. So I think it's important that we are able to articulate what we expect, right, within the election kind of context. And if you look at the law, actually, it's if you're doing caricature, if you are doing beauty filters and things like that, it's not something that it's not allowed, right? It's only where it has ability to influence people very specifically. Then there's some expectations of what needs to be done. So I think it's and in the elections context, it's fairly constrained. When the law starts and ends, or when it applies, it's very constrained. The kind of imagery is also, or the kind of images that will be covered is also very constrained. So it's one way in which you could tackle this issue in a very specific manner, addressing a very serious issue, even as technology changes and evolves, right? If you think about deepfakes issues more broadly, people are concerned. There are many other problems happening around. How do we use technology to solve it? How do we use regulations to solve it? I think these are still evolving. The technology for labeling is, you have C2PA as a way to ensure provenance and so on, as a standard to sort of support provenance, but it is still somewhat brittle in some ways, right? So there's still many issues. That's why I think starting with a very constrained problem, which is elections, may be helpful to inform us on how we could then tackle this in the broader way in future. Doesn't mean that we'll pass I'll be clear, doesn't mean we'll pass a law that deals with deepfakes in future, but it allows us to figure things out in a much more specific manner for a start. Yeah.
Related to that is the question of scams. The government is very, very sort of concerned about the proliferation of scams in Singapore, the investment scams, and I think they're largely financial and investment scams. And of course, AI is used to create deepfakes for those scams as well. How should we be thinking about safety frameworks around these, which are clearly hurting people as well, and causing large economic damages especially to small countries like Singapore. Singapore has been quite disproportionately hit by these investment and financial scams. How should governments? Many governments are grappling with this issue. How should governments be thinking about safety frameworks there? Given that they are sort of cross-border, multinational in nature, how should governments be approaching these frameworks, and how is Singapore approaching it?
Again, I'll be very upfront. This is not my area of expertise, so I can't say very much about it. I think if you look at it more abstractly, right, you just abstract out the issue, then it's both in terms of, number one, how do we detect the scams? Are there ways in which you can do that? And I think that's where you have organizations, whether it's banks or governments, coming together to build capacity for detection. Number two, how do you educate the consumers, the public, so that they understand and they are able to discern? So are there ways in which you could do that? I think so again, there's lots of, if you see, there's lots of marketing or campaigns to help public, be a bit more careful when it comes to these issues. Then number three, then what are the punitive measures in which you could, put in place to address, to ensure that malicious actors that do not feel that they want to do this, right? But then it's difficult because a lot of these scams doesn't originate from Singapore, right? They originate from other parts of the world. Then I think it's a way of how then do we work together with other enforcement agencies around the world to try and address this. So I'm just giving you a much more kind of breaking it down into a few areas to think about this. And then I think where AI comes in, maybe in the detection mechanism, in public education, maybe some kind of ways in which you could help them understand what's real, what's fake, in trying to find these potential malicious actors using technology tools. But I think maybe that's all I can talk about this. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Wansi. Mohan, do you have anything to add in terms of how we should approach deepfakes and scams and other uses, that malicious uses that AI can be put to, which is clearly top of mind for governments everywhere?
Yeah, I think I don't think I have anything substantive to add other than the fact that this is not a technological problem. This is a socio-technical problem which involves a lot of things, definitely technology, but also regulation. And as Wansi has repeatedly mentioned, education and awareness. I think this is very important. And also, I think decisive actions against perpetrators. And as you rightly pointed out, these are cross-border crimes. And we know there are certain jurisdictions which are very lax and they have actually big setups operating to scam. And I think governments need to work together in some regional or United Nations framework to crack down upon allowing such operations to run on your own boundaries, targeting people, some other countries. So I think it is going to be a multi-pronged effort which will take into that. But in the long run, I think we need to understand the technology and also the psychology of the people, which makes them vulnerable to such schemes, which is a combination of usually some kind of greed or some kind of blackmailing and some combination thereof. And knowing these reasons can actually help us counter the spread and the success of such scam operations.
Thank you. I had a final question before we go into Q&A and open it up for questions from our viewers, from our participants. Mohan, you mentioned the fact that it's not just a technical issue when it comes to scams, but I would say that even the whole approach to AI safety and regulation is not just about technology, correct? It's about education. It's about collaboration, as you mentioned. It's about bringing all stakeholders on board, including the evil big tech firms, including the common citizens, right? People have to know how to use AI, but also how it can be misused and manipulated. My question is there a right way to do this? Singapore has opted to choose its own path, really. It's not quite the White House guidelines for AI safety. It's not quite the EU AI Act. It's not quite the way that Australia is dealing with, example, social media platforms. So Singapore has chosen its own path. If you could sort of throw this into the future a little bit, I mean, we are entering a new era of geopolitical concerns and tensions. Do you see Singapore altering its path towards AI regulation and safety, given that, as you said, A, the technology keeps changing, but B, geopolitical conditions keep changing as well. So do you think that anything that Singapore is doing today in its approach towards AI safety and regulation is going to change dramatically in the years ahead. No one has a crystal ball, of course, but if you were to, hazard a guess, how do you see Singapore taking this forward in the next, let's not say 10 years, that's way too far out, but just in the next 2 to 3 years even, given that everything around us is changing so quickly, how would you see this going forward?
I presume the question is to me, right? Yeah, okay.
Well, it's to both of you, but one can go first, yes.
Okay. No, I mean, it's a good question. I think, again, it's hard to crystal ball gaze, right? So what I'll say is what will stay the same first, right? What will stay the same? I think we'll still adopt a very practical approach to how we think about AI governance and safety and regulations. That's one, practical. Two, the need to work with academia, work with industry, and essentially augment the kind of efforts that we have. I think that's important as well. As rightly discussed earlier today, I think we'll continue with that. That kind of approach. Three, partnering across government. Again, that's important. I mean, we are not going to have, even if you do have, as just borrowing Philip's words from earlier, some kind of omnibus legislation. I think we still need to make sure that it docks nicely with our sector regulators, what they're doing, so that it's consistent, well, not consistent, I suppose coherent and coordinated in how we think about this. And so that also industry doesn't get confused about what they need to do, that there's a consistent way to deal with it. So these are things that we'll continue to do, right? And then, of course, the third thing is we will continue to make sure that our ecosystem has the capacity to address, anything that we put out there in terms of requirements, right? They must be able to respond, if they have to comply, they must have the ability to do so, right? So will we pass a law? I don't know. I mean, that's something that may change very quickly. We did the online safety law, I think, over just a period of 1 year. The moment we felt that it was necessary, I think we can move it through very quickly. And similarly, if something crops up that requires us to act decisively, I think we'll definitely do so. Yeah, I suppose that's all I can say on this for now. Maybe I can also offer, and then maybe not an analogy, but you can look at an example of personal data protection, right? You look around the world, every country has their own privacy or personal data protection law, right? China has one. We're all familiar with the GDPR. Singapore has our PDPA, and we have similar laws cropping up in Southeast Asia and definitely around the world. All of them are quite similar, but also slightly different, because they all address the unique needs of the country. I mean, I'm just sort of responding to your earlier point about, US, China, EU, and other parts of the world. So I think Singapore, even if we do pass something, it will have to be something that addresses our needs. But at the same time, we're not going to be so completely different that, it look completely different from what everybody else is doing. I think we'll borrow where it's useful, where we can learn from others to incorporate into our legislation. And if you look at the PDPA, essentially, it's not that different from some of the other legislation out there, but it also has something that's fairly specific to Singapore. Yeah, so that could be one way to think about it. And if you again look at the PDPA, we also work very closely to augment our sector regulations in financial services, in healthcare, and so on when it comes to data protection.
Thank you, Wansi. Just wanna, I see that Michael is able to join us now, so maybe we can invite him to come on to sort of give some observations in terms of our discussion up to date and any other general thoughts. Michael, are you able to unmute yourself? Okay. So I think he's experiencing some technical issues. So maybe Rina, I'll pass the time back to you for so that we can go to the Q&A session.
Sure. Just wanted to ask Mohan quickly if he had some last thoughts on where you see AI safety and regulation heading in the next few years?
I think it is very hard to predict because it will really depend on the pace of development of AI. And in certain sense, it will go in tandem with the developments. And we kind of have some vulnerabilities or some dangers exposed. And then I think we will have to respond to that in terms of either regulation or law. And I think it is going to be a dynamic situation. And we need to really see what is there on the ground, because I think there are some people who are worried about the existential threats of AI, and whether there is any sense of urgency in that or not. On the other hand, the misuse cases which we have discussed is actually there today, and we need to be addressing them first. So to me, as far as I'm concerned, I think the regulators around the world should be watching the agentic AI. Agentic AI actually increases a degree of freedom by AI systems can operate, because they can operate physical machinery or physical stuff, and also it can write code and launch code which can have tremendous good potential and bad potential. So I think this is a space which I think I'm sure the regulators everywhere will be watching.
Thanks, Mohan. Are we able to hear from you?
I think I am now on.
Yes, you are. Welcome.
I really apologize. It's 4:00 a.m. here in Washington, so I'm not sure how coherent this will sound. But I've heard a lot of very, very good points made, and I want to reinforce several of them. The most important is the one that was just made, talking about AI-enabled agents is something we're not doing much of in the United States or around the world. I mean, the focus is so much on ChatGPT, and particularly because journalists love this tool. They can create text, but the really exciting things are going to be agents that can suck in data from multiple different sources, make intelligence decisions for us, both in our personal life and in the workplace. I always joke that we're going to make a lot more money off of using AI to manage sewage treatment plants and aircraft schedules than we are generating an article on the latest football match. But of course, the public can understand when AI talks to them. It's a lot harder to understand all these agents, which are going to be often working in the background. And they're going to be very hard to regulate, because some people aren't going to admit that they're using AI. I mean, this is the first challenge of all AI safety regulation, is deciding who are you actually regulating. I mean, this would get us off into a much longer conversation, but I think the key point that hasn't been addressed in country after country is, what are we actually talking about? It's and why are we just focusing on this one discipline of artificial intelligence? If you look at the AI Act, it's very clear that there isn't the European one. It's very clear there's not a boundary that specifies that these certain pieces of software are inside the box and these are outside the box. I mean, in the California law is even worse, in that it actually says something like, oh, we're concerned about software that uses AI, and similar types of technology. And they actually say in the discussion about the bill that, oh, well, we realize that technology is evolving, so we're going to have to change the boundary and include other things in the future. If I had my way, we would go back about 5 years and just say, let's just talk about software, and let's talk about the data that goes into this software, and let's focus on the uses of that software. Too often, regulators have determined that it's a lot easier to regulate 6 or 8 big companies that are making these monster models than it is to put some controls on how these monster models are used, which is really what we need to do. And starting with government use of these applications, which is probably the least transparent when it comes to law enforcement, national surveillance, and the like. So that's my first thought, and I hope that's helpful. My work at the Carnegie Endowment has lately focused a lot on East Asia and India as well. We just did a report on digital policy issues, examining Malaysia, Korea, Japan, and the US, and comparing how they're doing on the critical digital policy issues that are often unresolved. And each of these are ones that need to be resolved if we're actually going to address the harms that we've been talking about. One of them is digital identity, so that we can determine who's a scammer and who's not. Another one is data localization, which is a huge unresolved issue in most countries. Which data has to stay in country, which data can move across international borders. Clearly, getting data policy right is essential if we're going to get AI policy right. So just some initial thoughts at 4 a.m. in the morning. And I really apologize for being so late and getting on. I did not figure it out until just now that if you're not using Google Chrome, the Google Video app doesn't work properly.
Right.
So anyway, thank you. Great conversation. I'm glad I could listen in earlier, and I'm happy to answer specific questions on where we're going in this very young topic. My final comment is I've been working on tech policy for 35 years. We helped create the internet and e-government here in Washington, in the US. And I've never seen an issue more confused, more legitimate, more intentional deception. People saying things they know are not true. And it's confused the public. It's made people a lot more scared than they should be. And it's led us to focus less on the great things that we could be doing with AI and a lot of focus on the science fiction scary scenarios that are motivating a lot of this very vague and poorly defined legislation that's not going to look very good in 2 years when 5 or 6 brand new AI applications are spreading around the world.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Michael. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Michelle to see if we have any questions from our participants.
Sure. So I see a few people raising their hands. So maybe I think Leanne has a question. So maybe we'll start with Leanne, and then we'll go to Lydia, and then Philip.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah. So first of all, I want to give thanks to the panel speakers who made this roundtable possible. Thank you for confirming to our invitations. And first and foremost, as well, to Philip, who stepped up in providing the overview of AI safety for this roundtable. It was supposedly Professor Lam or Vanessa Wilfred. Once he made such a graceful and amazing approach in answering the questions that is related to her precision, but is not directly her expertise. So thank you very much. Also, thank you to Philip and Mike, who has tried to make to this roundtable. It's 4 a.m. their time in New York and DC. Yeah. So to the question, the context of my question is ASEAN 2025 to 2030 and international cooperation on AI governance and building AI safety science, remarkably in a velocity never seen before. And I'm curious, how does each panelist suggest Singaporean leadership should approach two things? One, arriving at what is the lowest common denominator of the region for inclusion, and two, arriving at what is the greatest common factor, uniquely Southeast Asia, that we should optimize in 2025 so we in the region is poised and more confident in the next years to come, whether that's agentic AI age or AGI era. Yeah.
Sorry, did you have someone specific in mind to answer the question, or?
I would happy to hear everyone's sent, including yours, Rina, if you do have one.
I'm just moderating here.
If I can weigh in, this is a place where having regional collaboration on data access and data quality would help position Singapore as a true leader. I mentioned earlier that we work a lot with India. Carnegie is a global think tank, and we have a very active and brilliant group in Delhi. We're getting ready for the Global Technology Summit, and AI will be high on the agenda. But also high on the agenda is data protection and data enablement. And we always focus on the privacy side. We're not so good at focusing on enabling users to have access to data about them and apply it using tools like machine learning to make their lives better. And there's just a few places in the world that have made data policy one of their highest digital policy priorities. The challenge has been mentioned already. It's how do we get high quality data? How do we filter out the disinformation and the misinformation? And how do we protect the privacy of individuals by, at the same time, harnessing that data? And that's something that has to be done internationally, but not necessarily just by international mega companies like Google and Facebook, who are sucking up all the data and building these data oceans that they can tap, but other companies maybe cannot tap. I'm a big fan of Sandy Pentland, Pentland at MIT, and he talks about data unions. The idea is that individual organizations will have more control over how their data is used and will be able to authorize certain uses and ban other uses, rather than just having it all uploaded into the cloud run by 1 or 2 or 6 companies. And this is a vision that is not well articulated. They are talking about it in India, and I'd urge Singapore to think about becoming a global leader in distributed data unions that then could be used for global purpose.
Hi, Michael. Huge props for waking up at 4 a.m. to do this.
Well, as I say, I hope I'm coherent.
You're definitely coherent. I agree with the points they made about making more data available. I mean, on the point of data unions, actually, some of the POCs that we're doing, at least within my team, are like looking at solid pods. That's another way of finding, having data decentralized and having some kind of control over who can use and who can update at a much more individual level. So that's one way to think about data accessibility.
The key thing is having the ability to take individual data records and slice them up so that I can share the fact that I'm over the age of 18 without sharing my birthday. And I can share that I'm in a certain jurisdiction without handing you my address. These are things that can be done. They are expensive. And of course, companies are under huge pressure to grab as much data in as much detail as they can, and to keep it for themselves. The one thing that I wish, and I'll shut up now, but the one thing I wish is that every politician and every CEO would just erase the idea that data is the new oil from inside their brain. That is just the wrong paradigm that is making it so much harder to get stuff done. Thank you.
Absolutely agree. Maybe just also to add one more point to the question about what we can do in Southeast Asia. I think we had this discussion, Mohan and I, earlier about multicultural and multilingual capabilities that we should be thinking about. I think that's something that we should do in Southeast Asia, given the huge diversity in culture and languages here. And if we are able to address these issues in the AI models, for example, and that could help to make AI more accessible and use in a safer way in Southeast Asia. Yeah, just one point to highlight. Mohan, would you like to add anything?
I just want to, I think these are great points. When Michael actually talked about erasure, it reminded me of this emerging research area of machine unlearning. And this is very important because once you share data and train your models, the data can become obsolete, or people can withdraw consent on the use of data, and we need to erase that information from the models. So I just want to say that that is one of the emerging areas. How do you reliably do so to unlock the data potential? Having said that, I think I agree with Michael's viewpoint and also Wansi's, and I think there is a lot of a role to play in collaborating in the region and coming up with common aspirations and using them to bring together teams to build things which is useful to everyone.
Great. So I think Lydia has another question.
Hi, yes. Yes, first of all, thank you, AISA, for organizing this. And thank you, dear panelists. I really enjoyed the balanced discussion. Yeah, I'm a consultant and my background is in digital and tech, and I have a deep interest in AI. I've spoken on it in the past few years as well. Just interesting that we talked about access roles for data just now. And maybe we could use blockchain to control access to data unions and to verify digital identity, for example. That's just a thought. But anyway, my main point was that I appreciate that we're looking at ethics of AI and what Mohan mentioned just now earlier on. And I was thinking, using what standards do we base this ethics on? That's been something that's on my mind a couple of years, given that we all have differing values and morals on what's right and wrong. I mean, as people groups, cultures, like you mentioned, multicultures and stuff. I mean, even within ASEAN, we're also different as well. And I mean, nations, all of us have different viewpoints on things. So I wonder what work has been done around this area and how, if at all, do you think that perhaps we can work together or governments can work together to play a role in this? And then, I mean, to also kind of related point, I wonder if we could be trusted to act for our own moral good. Because just look at an example of OpenAI. It was meant to be used for non-profit, right? But it quickly swung to become a for-profit organization. And then look at Google. It did not feel like its AI product was safe enough to be released at first, but then it did so after public and investor pressure and after like Microsoft's advancements. So I mean, I wonder if we would be pressured to give in to capitalism pressures. And so, yeah, in view of this also, my second question was, we do see a bias in AI models based on whatever information that we feed the systems, right? So in the US, for instance, there's been talk about bias around this, I mean, a quote like white versus black data, But I wonder how Singapore could contribute to leveling any bias in data, AI, if at all, but at the same time work to balancing data access and not feeding the machine too much due to security. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I don't know who would like to go. I can take a stab at your two questions. I think the first question was, I think different countries have different values, and how do you reconcile them within the same model? I think what you have asked is a very interesting research question, and this is related to what I earlier spent saying on value alignment. That means we want our models to reflect the value of a society. But just like there are differences between countries, in fact, within a country also there are differences. There are a lot of individuals who hold actually opposite viewpoints on many things like death penalty and many other things. So in fact, our legal frameworks kind of reflect the current consensus in society. And it does not mean that everybody agrees with whatever is the current framework. So in AI models, the way human values are inculcated is via what is known as preference models. And the way the preference models are trained is basically asking a lot of humans some questions and getting a preferred response to that and use that to train the models. This is still work in progress because ideally the preference model, if you give a little bit of such real human data, it should generalize to all the values in society. Clearly, they are not able to. And how do you improve the value alignment process is a very active area of research in AI safety. So I think that is what I would like to. So maybe I will leave the second question to other people to answer. I don't want to.
If I can just add, this is related to the point that was discussed earlier about the need for different languages. I was recently in Taiwan, and they're really motivated to get out there and develop models based on the huge amount of Taiwanese content in Taiwan script. They're very concerned that in the future, if the PRC develops the dominant models, that when you type in a question like what happened in Tiananmen Square, it won't necessarily be one that reflects reality. In India as well, there's so many languages, and there's a real concern that a lot of very important wisdom and knowledge is not being incorporated into some of the models that they're working on. I've seen research where people have looked at models trained on Ukrainian language versus Russian language. And because the Russian content is mostly coming from Moscow or nearby, two different realities come out when you ask these questions. But again, this speaks to the need to have a distributed model, data coming from many places, and the ability to combine it in ways that meet your needs.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one last question. If Philip has a question that he would like to raise.
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much to all the speakers for their insights during the presentation. It is 4 a.m. as well, so please forgive me if I'm incoherent as well. But I just really wanted to ask about geopolitics and regional competition. I think someone in the chat mentioned this as well. Maybe my question is also directed more towards Prof. Mohan and Wansi. Several other countries in Southeast Asia, like for instance, Vietnam and Malaysia, want to be AI hubs in the region. And Singapore also wants to be one as well. Like very evidently, we see this in the national AI strategy. How does Singapore intend to distinguish itself from other players in the region? And do you think that multiple Southeast Asian countries can be complementary AI hubs of each other? Or do you think it's more of a zero-sum game?
I don't think we want to live in the world where everything is a zero-sum game.
If you think data is the new oil, that's what you end up with.
Yeah,
and
but
people hoard their data. They don't allow sharing and combining. I taught at Georgetown University in the Communications, Culture, and Technology program. I'm a physicist by training, but I learned a lot from the linguists and the journalists and the communication studies experts. And the most important thing I learned is you can't beat a bad slogan or tweet with nothing. You can't just say, don't say data is the new oil. You have to say something else. And what I've determined is data is the new water. And like water, it flows across boundaries, either as rivers or as clouds. Like data, lots of it's locked up in the deep ocean or frozen in Antarctica, very hard to use, very hard to find even. But if we work hard, we can use water, we can reuse water, we can combine it. We have so many different ways of using it. And of course, data and water can both get polluted, and we have to do something about that. But I think if we can just get people to think of the global hydrosphere as our model for the global infosphere or data sphere, then we would solve half the problems with data policy right now.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Data is the new water.
Let me interject to dispel some of the pessimist kind of outlook on data sharing and all. So at AI Singapore, which Vansi mentioned earlier about the ASEAN language model Sea Lion, we actually have worked with all the regional partners in a way being very inclusive, and also develop the model in a very ethical way. And to our immense delight, I think the partners are willing to share data. So it is not they're unwilling to share, as long we are also willing to share our data. So in a spirit of reciprocity. In fact, Indonesia just recently, I think 2 weeks ago, released its sovereign model, Sahabat AI. And AI Singapore actually cooperated with Indonesia to help them build their sovereign model. So it does not have to be a zero-sum game. And we can all benefit from sharing data. And I think this is something which I have talked to a lot of doctors, and this is one area where data sharing makes sense. No particular hospital or health system has all the data required to train a really accurate model. And this requires hopefully global level cooperation to build this foundation model, which will improve the healthcare everywhere in the world. And hopefully, I think, Michael, your idea of water is great. If everybody thinks, data as water, hopefully we can get to that level of global cooperation to really unlock the potential of AI to increase the level of healthcare, available to citizens all around the world.
And I think to just also address Philip's question about AI hubs, can we have multiple AI hubs in ASEAN? Of course we can. How AI benefits us is in how we use it. All of different countries in ASEAN have different sort of strengths. So Singapore, we're not strong in agriculture. I mean, there's no agriculture in Singapore. We're not strong in aquaculture or any of these areas. So these are other areas in which our ASEAN neighbors could definitely be strong AI hubs in, right? How you use AI is how you could benefit, right? So that's so as I said earlier, it's not a zero-sum game. I think we can all support one another. I think Prof. Mohan gave a very good example of how we can do that together. And certainly in healthcare is one area we could collaborate a lot more on. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think we're at time. So before we wrap, maybe I'll get our speakers here to sort of leave us with one key message that you would like our audience to remember, call to action, and key message, and then I will then wrap up. Maybe we'll start with Wansi.
I hope that the audience found this discussion useful. I think one of the key messages, and it sort of came out a few times in our discussion today, was that nothing is binary, right? It's not you or me. It's not zero sum. It's not that you have to lose in order for me to win, right? So I think there are many opportunities which we could collaborate, and we could actually make sure that as Southeast Asia or even as a global community, we can ensure that then AI actually benefits our people. Thanks.
Thank you. Professor Mohan?
Yeah, I think for me, as a computer science professor, this is one of the most exciting times to live. I think there is so much potential to be gained by AI. There are so many challenges, and there are so many applications waiting to happen. So in certain sense, I'm very optimistic about these developments in AI, because in certain sense, it puts all countries on a level playing field. Countries or geographies or regions which are going to seize opportunities by, as Michael pointed out, by cooperating in a mutually beneficial way, are going to surge ahead. So in certain sense, I don't think it is only the big tech or the big countries or anybody has a unique advantage in this space. And one of the nice things, and this is something I'm very proud as a computer scientist, is that we have a culture of open source, which has really helped proliferation of knowledge and capability and skills around the world. And this will actually help bring up everybody up to a higher level. And therefore, I'm very optimistic. I think we have so many bright people around the world, and if we can work together, there is so much exciting things to be done, and also so much to be done in making sure that whatever we develop is safe and beneficial and useful to humanity.
Thank you, Professor Mohan. Michael?
Real quickly, I do a lot of tweeting, so I'm good at sound bites and slogans. You can follow me at @Mike Nelson. But I'm also on Threads and Blue Sky. But my tweets are, you've already heard, data is the new water. Second one is really important, and that is we need to stop treating AI as the latest new shiny object. We're all looking at this and thinking, this is so special, we need all these new laws. No. Machine learning is just a case study that makes it more important that we solve all these other thorny problems. And I put a link to the report where we define the 11 most important, most difficult digital issues. And then the last thing you asked about, you said it was such an exciting time. And I agree, it's such an exciting time for technologists. For technology policy people, this is an incredibly frustrating time, because so many people who haven't done their homework are telling us what to do about the technology. So I would urge everyone around the world who's trying to write policy in this area, or digital policy in general, is to adopt the slogan that we had in the Clinton White House when I worked there with Vice President Gore. First, do no harm. And that was why the US was at least 3 years ahead of everybody else when it came to internet development and e-government development in the mid-90s. So I appreciate the chance to be here, and I'm sorry, very sorry, that I did not know that Google tries to lock out every other browser when you use this service. Thank you.
Thank you. So last but not least, Rina, would you like to close us out? Then we'll wrap up.
Many things I've learned today. But also, just an enormous big thank you to the panelists. I was in a bit of a panic when Michael didn't appear. So I really put Vansi and Mohan in the spot, really grilling them with the questions, and you've been so gracious and so patient. So thank you for your time, all three of the panelists, and to our participants for your interesting questions, and to AI Safety Asia.
Thank you so much, Rina, and thank you to our speakers. So we'll wrap up our roundtables discussion here. Thank you for joining, and hopefully we'll see you guys in our upcoming roundtables. Have a great evening, and to those who celebrate Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Great comments, everyone.